My entitled family sued me for $100,000. They claimed I caused a serious accident. Everyone believed them. Then the judge pressed play. Everyone in court shocked. Then Judge Word slapped them. Subscribe before we go any further, because the next 20 minutes are going to make your blood boil and then make your week. My name is Claire Bennett, and 3 years ago I was just trying to drive home from a client meeting on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Maple Ridge, Ohio. I'm a bookkeeper, the kind of person who reconciles other people's chaos for a living. And I drive the same speed limit my driving instructor taught me back in high school. I was halfway down Birchwood Lane, a sleepy little residential street with maple trees on both sides, when a black Chevy Tahoe shot backward out of a driveway like it had been launched from a cannon. I slammed my brakes. My car stopped a full 3 feet behind that Tahoe, and I sat there with my heart hammering, grateful I hadn't hit them at all. Then the doors flew open. 1, 2, 3, 4 people spilled out of that SUV screaming like they'd been in a 50-mile-an-hour collision. Richard Whitmore clutched his neck and dropped to one knee on the asphalt. His wife Diane started sobbing into her hands before she'd even fully stood up. Their son Tyler, my ex-fiancé of all people, was holding the back of his head and yelling that he couldn't feel his fingers. And their daughter Madison, 19 years old, was lying flat on her back in the middle of the street, eyes closed, like she was auditioning for a soap opera. I sat frozen behind my steering wheel thinking, this can't be real, there's no way this is real. A neighbor must have called it in because within 4 minutes a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing, and out stepped a man I recognized instantly. Sergeant Dale Hutchins, Richard Whitmore's golf buddy of 15 years. The same man I'd seen shaking Richard's hand at the 4th of July parade every single summer. He didn't even glance at my car. He walked straight to Richard, helped him up, and said, "Rich, you all right, buddy?" I remember sitting there thinking, buddy. He called him buddy. I tried to explain that the Tahoe had backed out directly into my lane and slammed its brakes for no reason. And Sergeant Hutchins looked at me like I just told him the sky was purple. "Ma'am, 4 witnesses are telling me you rear-ended this family at high speed. 4 witnesses. The 4 people who had just gotten out of the car they were claiming I hit." I asked him if he was going to review my dash cam, the little device clipped low near my rearview mirror, barely visible. And he waved it off and said dash cams get knocked around in real accidents. They're not reliable evidence anyway, and he wrote me up for reckless driving on the spot. I drove home that night shaking so hard I had to pull over twice. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, that it would get sorted out, that surely a cop with a badge wouldn't just lie for his friend. I was wrong about almost everything that week. 3 weeks later, a process server knocked on my apartment door and handed me papers that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. The Whitmore family was suing me for $104,000 in damages, citing permanent neck and spinal injuries for all 4 of them, lost wages, emotional distress, and pain and suffering. $104,000. I make $42,000 a year. I sat on my kitchen floor that night and cried until my throat hurt because I knew exactly what this family was capable of, and I knew exactly why they had picked me. Here's the part I haven't told you yet, the part that makes this whole thing so much uglier. Tyler Whitmore was my fiancé for 2 years before he cheated on me with a coworker and called off our engagement 3 weeks before the wedding. Diane Whitmore, his mother, never forgave me for, in her words, embarrassing this family by not just getting over it quietly. She'd said that to my face at my own sister's barbecue 2 years after the breakup, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. And my sister Renee is married to Mark Hayes, who happens to be Diane Whitmore's younger brother. Which means the Whitmores aren't just some random family who picked a stranger off the street. They are, by marriage, my family. And that, viewers, is exactly why this is going in the family revenge pile and not just the dashcam pile. When I called Renee in tears that night, the first thing she said wasn't, "Are you okay?" It was, "Claire, please just settle this quietly. Mark's whole family is humiliated enough already." I remember holding the phone away from my ear and just staring at it, thinking, did she really just say that to me? I told her I didn't hit anyone, that the Tahoe backed into my lane, that I had it on camera. She sighed, this long, tired, irritated sigh, like I was the inconvenience, and said, "Claire, it's 4 against 1. Just talk to a lawyer about a settlement before this gets worse for everyone. For everyone. For everyone. Not for me, for everyone. I hung up that call and sat in the dark for almost an hour, and that's when the first real crack in my chest opened up, because the people who were supposed to be on my side weren't even pretending anymore. Over the following weeks, the lawsuit started eating into every corner of my life. My insurance company flagged my policy for review and threatened to drop me over the reckless driving citation. My boss at the accounting firm called me into his office because, quote, clients are starting to ask questions, since apparently Diane Whitmore had been telling anyone who would listen at her hair salon that I'd nearly killed her entire family. I started getting looks at the grocery store. Maple Ridge is a small town, the kind where everyone's second cousin works at the bank and everyone's aunt teaches Sunday school. And gossip moves faster than the actual mail. By week 3, total strangers were giving me sympathetic head tilts in the cereal aisle, like I was a woman who'd done something terrible and just hadn't been caught for it yet. Tyler started texting me directly around this time, which honestly took a special kind of nerve. Just settle this, Claire. My mom won't let it go. You know how she is? He wrote, like managing his mother's grudges was somehow my job now. Like I owed his family a payout for the privilege of having once loved him. I didn't respond to a single message. Then Diane showed up at my office unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, sweet as poisoned tea, smiling at the receptionist like she was dropping off cookies. She sat across from my desk, lowered her voice to that syrupy, concerned tone she used at church potlucks and said, "We don't want this to get ugly. Sweetheart, families fix things quietly, don't they?" My coworkers were close enough to hear every word, and I watched 2 of them exchange a look that told me exactly what story would be circulating by lunch. I asked her as calmly as I could manage to leave my workplace, and she left with this little hurt sigh, like I was the one being unreasonable. I want you to sit with that feeling for a second, because it's a specific kind of loneliness. Being publicly convicted by whispers while the actual truth sits quietly on a memory card in your glove compartment. I almost forgot about that memory card completely, if I'm being honest. I'd installed the dashcam 2 years earlier after a hit and run in a parking lot left me with no proof and no recourse. And it had basically become background noise, something I forgot was even there. Mounted low and small near the mirror, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. A friend of mine, Priya, who works in IT, was the one who actually reminded me. She came over for coffee, saw the lawsuit papers spread across my table, and said, "Wait, didn't you put a dashcam in after that parking lot thing?" I sat there for a full 10 seconds before I even processed what she'd said. I ran outside in my socks, popped open the little SD card slot, and held that card in my hand like it was a winning lottery ticket I'd almost thrown away. That night, I plugged it into my laptop with my hands actually trembling, terrified the footage might be corrupted, terrified it might not have caught the right angle, terrified that the one piece of proof I had left in the world might be useless. It wasn't useless. It was perfect. Crystal clear 4K dual lens front and cabin facing, with audio recording the entire time. And it had caught absolutely everything, starting almost 90 seconds before the Tahoe even moved. But here's where the story takes a turn you are not going to expect. Because what I found on that footage wasn't just proof that I hadn't hit anyone. It was proof of something so much worse. On the cabin-facing lens, in the corner of the frame just before the crash, you can see directly into the back window of the Tahoe through my own windshield reflection, and you can hear, faintly but clearly enough once I boosted the audio, Madison Whitmore's voice from inside that car saying, "Okay, on 3, everybody drop, just like we practiced with Aunt Cheryl's car." I rewound it 4 times because I genuinely did not believe what I was hearing. Practiced. Like we practiced. This wasn't a one-time scheme born out of desperation. This was a routine. I called Priya back at 1 in the morning, half apologizing for the hour, and just played her the clip with no context. She was quiet for a long moment and then said, very flatly, "Claire, that's not an accident, that's a heist." The 2 of us spent the rest of that night at my kitchen table, her laptop and mine both open, pulling every public civil court record we could find with the Whitmore name attached, going back as far as the county's online database allowed. I sat there at 1 in the morning with my laptop glowing in the dark, and that's when the second gut punch hit me. The one that changed the entire direction of this story. Because I started digging into public court records that same week. just out of a sick curiosity. And I found 3 other personal injury claims filed by the Whitmore family or close associates of theirs over the past 6 years, one against a delivery driver, one against an elderly widow who'd had her license revoked afterward out of sheer panic and shame, and one filed 2 years ago against a teenage boy who'd just gotten his license, whose family settled out of court for $31,000 because they couldn't afford a lawyer and were terrified of going up against people the local police chief golfed with. Every single one of those claims listed the exact same chiropractor as the treating physician, a Dr. Felix Granger, operating out of a strip mall clinic 2 towns over, who apparently had a very specific talent for diagnosing chronic whiplash in patients who showed 0 visible signs of injury. This family had built a small, quiet, profitable little fraud machine, and they had been running it for years, and nobody had ever called them on it because nobody had ever had the proof. I had the proof. And that, my friends, is the moment everything in me went very, very still and very, very calm. Now, let's talk about rock bottom for a second, because it wasn't actually the lawsuit itself that broke me. It was the week after I found that footage, when I made the mistake of trying to use it the easy way. I called Renee, excited, almost giddy with relief, and told her everything. The recording, the staged drop, the pattern of past claims. I expected her to be horrified on my behalf. Instead, there was this long, heavy silence on the phone, and then she said, very quietly, "Claire, please don't do anything with that. It would destroy Mark's family, and it would destroy our family too." I asked her what that was supposed to mean. And she finally admitted it, the thing I think some part of me had already suspected but hadn't let myself fully believe. Mark had told her weeks before the staged accident even happened that his sister Diane was, quote, figuring out a way to recoup some money because the Whitmore construction business was drowning in debt after a bad commercial contract. Renee had known. Not the details, she swore, not that it would be me specifically, not that they'd fake an accident in broad daylight. But she'd known something was coming, known her in-laws were planning some kind of insurance scheme, and she had said nothing to anyone, including her own sister. That phone call is the moment I hit the actual floor, emotionally speaking. Not the lawsuit. Not the fake injuries. My own sister had a piece of a puzzle that could have warned me, and she chose her in-laws' comfort over my safety. Growing up, Renee and I shared a bedroom until I was 14. And she used to stand between me and our father's temper like a human shield, every single time, no exceptions. That history is exactly why this hurt so much, because the sister who used to take the hit for me had let me walk straight into one instead. I didn't yell at her. I just said, very quietly, "I need you to not call me again until this is over." And I hung up. And I sat on my bathroom floor and cried in a way I hadn't cried since the day Tyler told me he was leaving me 3 weeks before our wedding. That same week, my boss called me back into his office, and this time it wasn't just a casual mention of clients asking questions. He slid a printed email across the desk from one of our biggest accounts, a local dental practice, gently suggesting they might need to reconsider their bookkeeping arrangements given the ongoing litigation. He didn't fire me that day, but he made it clear, in the careful hedging language of a man covering himself legally, that my job was hanging by a thread that had nothing to do with my actual work. I want to be honest with you. There was a night that week where I genuinely considered just paying whatever I could scrape together to make it all go away. Because the loneliness of being disbelieved by your own blood is a special kind of exhausting. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, scrolling through old photos of Madison's 16th birthday party, the one where Diane had made a toast about family always protecting family, something in me hardened instead of broke. If family meant nothing to them when it was convenient to use me as a payday, then I owed them nothing either. I stopped trying to make Renee understand. I stopped trying to explain myself to neighbors at the grocery store. I went completely, deliberately quiet, and that quiet is exactly where my real plan began. The first thing I did was something most people skip. Because it's boring and it's slow, and slow doesn't feel satisfying when you're furious. I found a lawyer. I spent 2 full evenings reading through local attorney reviews, specifically filtering for anyone with zero connection to Maple Ridge's tight little social web, because I needed someone who wouldn't flinch at Richard Whitmore's name or owe Sergeant Hutchins a favor from some old fishing trip. Not a flashy one, not someone who advertises on bus benches with a slogan about getting you cash fast, but a sharp, methodical attorney 2 counties over named Samuel Ortiz, specifically chosen because he had zero ties to Maple Ridge and zero ties to Sergeant Hutchins' golf league. I showed him the footage in his office, and I watched this calm, unflappable man actually lean forward in his chair and say, "Okay, this changes everything, but we are not showing our hand yet." That single sentence became my entire strategy for the next 4 months. We are not showing our hand yet. Sam explained that if we went public too early, if we leaked the footage or confronted the Whitmores directly, they would have time to settle quietly, drop the suit, destroy whatever records still existed, and walk away with nothing but a minor scare. The goal wasn't just to win my case. The goal was to make sure they never did this to anyone else again. So we built it slow. Sam had a forensic video analyst formally authenticate the dashcam footage, timestamp it, certify the audio so there would be zero room for anyone to claim it was edited or staged. Then we filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Department of Insurance's Fraud Investigation Unit, attaching the footage along with the pattern of prior claims I dug up from public court records. A state investigator named Will Sutter called me personally 2 weeks later. And the first thing he said was, "Miss Bennett, do you have any idea how long we've been trying to build a case against this exact chiropractic clinic?" Apparently, Dr. Granger's clinic had been quietly flagged before, multiple times. But every previous complaint had died for lack of hard evidence. Because soft tissue injuries are notoriously easy to fake and almost impossible to disprove without something like, say, a recording of the victims literally planning the fall in advance. If I had given them their hard evidence too early or too loudly, a good lawyer on their side could have argued it away. Before I ever called a lawyer, I spent an entire weekend reading through Ohio's insurance fraud statutes and civil procedure rules online, just trying to understand what I was even looking at, what counted as actionable fraud, what the statute of limitations looked like, and what kind of proof actually held up in a courtroom versus what just felt satisfying to imagine. I had given them their hard evidence. Right around this time, the Whitmore's attorney reached out to Sam with what he called a generous, family-friendly offer, proposing to drop the lawsuit entirely if I simply signed a non-disclosure agreement and agreed never to discuss the incident publicly. No admission of wrongdoing on their part, no payment to me for the legal fees I had already racked up, just a quiet, tidy little disappearance of the whole mess. Sam relayed the offer with a small, knowing smile and asked me what I wanted to do. I told him to decline politely and to let them keep thinking they were still winning. A week later, Sam's private investigator turned up something we hadn't even gone looking for. An old neighbor on Birchwood Lane still had a doorbell camera angled, just enough to catch a sliver of the Tahoe's reverse maneuver from a completely different angle, and it matched my footage frame for frame. Around that same time, Richard Whitmore cornered me at a gas station off Route 9, leaning against my car door before I could even finish pumping gas, and said, low and tight, "You really want to drag this out and make it worse for yourself, Claire?" I just looked at him, said, "See you in court, Richard," and got back in my car. And I drove away with my hands shaking, not from fear this time, but from the strange, sharp thrill of finally not flinching. While the state investigation moved forward quietly in the background, Sam handled my actual lawsuit defense with a kind of patient, surgical calm that made me feel like I could finally breathe again. We didn't rush to dismiss the case. We let the Whitmores' lawyer schedule depositions. Let them get comfortable. Let Richard Whitmore sit across from me in a conference room and describe, under oath in vivid and dramatic detail, the exact moment of impact he claimed had happened. He described it as a violent, jarring collision. He used the words, "I thought I was going to die." He said his neck still wakes him up at night, 18 months later. Every single word of it was recorded, transcribed, and locked into the legal record, permanently, under penalty of perjury. Diane Whitmore cried during her deposition, real tears, describing months of physical therapy she claimed to have endured. Tyler talked about how the accident had derailed his promotion at work. Madison, my personal favorite, described in detail how she'd had to defer her sophomore year of college because the injury made it impossible to sit through long lectures, every word locked in, sworn, signed. At one point during his deposition, Sam asked Richard a simple, almost throwaway question. "Mr. Whitmore, in the moments before the collision, was anyone in your vehicle speaking?" Richard paused for just a beat too long and said, "No, not that I recall, we were just driving." That single sworn answer, "not that I recall," would later sit directly across from Madison's recorded voice on my dashcam audio, planning the entire fall in real time. And there is no good way to explain that contradiction once a judge has heard both. They had no idea they were building their own prison with their own mouths. Meanwhile, investigator Sutter's team had quietly reopened all 3 prior claims, and something remarkable happened. The teenage boy's family, the ones who'd settled for $31,000 2 years earlier out of sheer fear, came forward the moment they heard the state was investigating. The boy's mother told Sutter. In a recorded statement Sam later shared with me once it became part of the public record, "We knew it was fake. We just didn't think anyone would believe a 17-year-old over a town councilman, so we paid it and we tried to forget about it." The elderly widow whose license had been revoked agreed to testify, and she told the investigators she'd spent 2 years too embarrassed to leave her own house some days, convinced the entire town secretly believed she was a danger behind the wheel. The delivery driver's old dashcam footage, it turned out, still existed in a cloud backup he'd forgotten about, and it showed almost the exact same maneuver: a sudden reverse, a sudden brake, 4 people piling out screaming within seconds. It was the same script. Every single time, the same script down to the order in which they climbed out of the vehicle and the specific way Madison always seemed to hit the ground last, like she'd been told to wait for her cue. By the time my civil trial date arrived, 4 months after that first patrol car pulled up on Birchwood Lane, the Whitmores had absolutely no idea that a criminal insurance fraud case was being built around them in parallel, quietly, by a state agency that had been waiting years for exactly this kind of break. They thought they were simply suing a quiet bookkeeper who'd be too scared and too broke to fight back. The morning of the trial, I remember sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom, and Diane Whitmore actually walked past me, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I hope you've got a good amount saved up, Claire." I just smiled and said nothing. Sam had told me, whatever happens, let them talk, let them feel powerful right up until the second they aren't. Inside the courtroom, their attorney spent the first 30 minutes presenting their case exactly like they had at the depositions. Dramatic, tearful, full of phrases like permanent damage and life-altering trauma. I glanced back once and saw Renee sitting in the 3rd row alone, twisting a tissue in her hands, having shown up that morning without telling me, which was the first time in months she'd chosen to be anywhere near this mess at all. Sergeant Hutchins even took the stand in uniform and testified that in his professional assessment, I had been driving recklessly and had caused the collision. On cross-examination, Sam asked him a single quiet question: whether he had reviewed any dashcam footage before issuing the citation, and Hutchins shifted in his seat and admitted on the record that he had not. I watched the judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Judge Patricia Albright, take notes the entire time without showing a flicker of reaction. Then it was our turn. Sam stood up, calm as ever, and said, "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit time-stamped, forensically authenticated dashcam footage into evidence." The Whitmore's lawyer barely reacted, probably assuming it would show some grainy, inconclusive angle, the kind of thing dashcams are sometimes dismissed for. He had no idea what was actually about to play on that courtroom screen. The video started 90 seconds before impact, clear as day, dated and time-stamped in the corner. You could see the Tahoe sitting still in the driveway. Then you could hear it, faint but unmistakable once the analyst had cleaned up the audio. Madison's voice from inside the vehicle. "Okay, on 3, everybody drop, just like we practiced with Aunt Cheryl's car." A gasp actually rippled through the gallery. Then the Tahoe reversed sharply, directly into my lane, braked hard, and 4 doors flew open in perfect, rehearsed synchronization. You could see, frame by frame, slowed down by the forensic analyst, that Madison was already halfway to the ground before her body could have possibly reacted to any real impact. Because there had been no impact, my car had stopped a clean 3 feet behind theirs. Richard Whitmore's hand was on his neck before he'd even fully exited the vehicle. The footage ran for nearly 4 full minutes, capturing the entire staged collapse, and then it captured something even more damning. Sergeant Hutchins arriving on scene and immediately, audibly saying, "Rich, you all right, buddy?" Before he had so much as glanced in my direction, the courtroom went dead silent. I watched Richard Whitmore's face change in real time, the color just draining out of it like someone had pulled a plug. Diane grabbed his arm. Tyler put his head in his hands. Madison, 19 years old, just stared at the screen with her mouth slightly open, like she was watching her entire future evaporate in real time, which, in a way, she was. Someone in the gallery, an older man I didn't recognize, muttered, "Unbelievable," just loud enough for the bailiff to glance over. And Judge Albright let the courtroom sit in that stunned silence for a few extra seconds before she spoke again, like even she wanted the weight of it to land fully. Judge Albright didn't even let the Whitmore's attorney finish his next sentence. She asked, very directly, whether the defense, meaning me, had additional evidence regarding a pattern of similar claims. And Sam stood up and said, "Yes, Your Honor," and that's when Investigator Sutter, who had been quietly seated in the back of the courtroom the entire time, stood up and formally identified himself to the court. He stated, on the record, that the Ohio Department of Insurance had an active fraud investigation open against the Whitmore family and Dr. Felix Granger's clinic, supported by 3 additional victims and corroborating footage. The judge dismissed the Whitmore family's lawsuit against me in full, with prejudice, meaning they could never refile it, and on the record stated that she was referring the matter directly to the county prosecutor for review of potential perjury charges given their sworn deposition testimony. I watched Diane Whitmore, the woman who once told me I had embarrassed her family by being heartbroken too publicly, start sobbing in a courtroom full of strangers, except this time nobody was buying it. The grand unraveling didn't stop at the courthouse doors either. Within a week, the state's criminal case became public record, and Maple Ridge's gossip machine, the same one that had spent months whispering about reckless me, flipped entirely overnight. Richard Whitmore's construction company lost its standing town contract within 10 days. The town council citing, very diplomatically, concerns regarding the integrity of associated parties, and 2 smaller private clients followed within the month once the local paper ran a short piece on the council vote. He resigned from his own seat on that same council before they could vote to remove him, reading a stiff, carefully worded statement about wanting to focus on his family, which, given everything, struck almost everyone in town as darkly funny. Dr. Felix Granger's clinic was raided, his license suspended pending the investigation, and it turned out he had at least 9 other suspicious claims connected to families with ties to the Whitmores or their extended circle. A pattern investigators said likely netted the group well over $200,000. Across 6 years once everything was added up. Sergeant Hutchins was placed on administrative leave while Internal Affairs reviewed his handling of the case, and 2 months later he quietly resigned rather than face a formal hearing on falsifying his original incident report. Tyler lost the promotion he'd sworn under oath the injury had cost him, except this time for an entirely different reason. His employer didn't take kindly to discovering one of their managers had been caught committing perjury in a state fraud case. Madison's college actually opened its own academic integrity review, since she'd submitted that same fabricated injury claim to defer enrollment and receive a tuition adjustment. Every domino fell exactly because they had every single one of them, sworn to a story under oath that a piece of forensic 4K footage proved, beyond any shadow of doubt, was a lie. The criminal charges took almost a year to fully process, but in the end, Richard and Diane Whitmore both pleaded guilty to insurance fraud and conspiracy in exchange for reduced sentencing, receiving probation, steep fines, and a permanent ban from filing insurance claims without independent third-party medical review for a decade. Tyler and Madison, as the younger participants with less direct planning involvement, avoided criminal charges but were named in a civil restitution order alongside their parents, which required the family to repay the $31,000 taken from that terrified teenage boy's family years earlier, plus damages. As for me, my reckless driving citation was formally vacated and expunged. My insurance policy was reinstated at its original rate with a formal letter of apology from the company, and the Whitmores were ordered to cover my full legal fees, which Sam had quietly been documenting down to the last billable hour, and Renee. Renee showed up at my apartment the week after the trial ended, and I almost didn't let her in. She stood in my doorway and just said, "I should have told you the second I had a bad feeling. And I let being comfortable with Mark's family matter more than protecting my own sister, and I am so sorry. I didn't forgive her that day." I want to be honest with you about that. Because real relationships don't heal in one dramatic doorway speech, no matter how good it sounds in a story. But over the following months, she showed up consistently in the boring, unglamorous ways that actually matter, driving me to court dates, sitting with me on bad nights, finally choosing her own sister over people who had used both of us. We're not exactly where we used to be. But we're rebuilding, slowly, the right way, the way that earns trust back instead of just assuming it. About a year after the trial, I ran into Madison at a grocery store 2 towns over, of all places, both of us reaching for the same shelf of pasta sauce. She looked at me for a second, opened her mouth like she might say something, and then just looked away and pushed her cart toward the register. And honestly, I didn't need her to say anything at all. I think about that quiet little dash cam sometimes. The one I almost forgot I even had, mounted low near my mirror, recording away in the background of an ordinary life while I worried about ordinary things like rent and grocery bills. It sat there silently for 2 years doing nothing more dramatic than watching empty roads. And then on one quiet Tuesday afternoon, it became the only honest witness in a room full of people who had spent years getting away with lying. There's a lesson in that I think about more than I expected to. For months I thought my silence was weakness, that staying quiet while everyone in town believed the worst about me meant I was losing, when really it was the only thing that gave the truth enough room to do its work properly. You don't always have to fight loud to win. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay quiet. Gather your proof, trust the process, and let people's own greed and arrogance build the case against them, one sworn, recorded, undeniable word at a time. The Whitmores spent 6 years running the exact same script on people who didn't have the resources to fight back. They picked the wrong bookkeeper to underestimate. If there's one thing I want you to take from this, it's that the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs a witness, and a little bit of patience, and eventually it always finds its way to the light. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If this gave you even a little bit of the satisfaction it gave me to finally tell it, hit that subscribe button. Because there are a lot more stories like this one coming. And every single one of them ends the same way, with quiet patience beating loud lies every single time.